Hi everyone, glad to see you back on the channel. Today we are diving into a question that sparks intense debate, speculation, and misinformation across the world. What does the United States actually plan for Venezuela? Beyond headlines, political slogans, and viral claims, there is a much deeper and more calculated strategy at play. To understand it, we need to look at history, economics, energy security, geopolitics, and the reality of power politics in the modern world. For decades, Venezuela has been one of the most strategically important countries in the Western Hemisphere. It holds the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, even larger than Saudi Arabia. That single fact alone guarantees that Venezuela will never be ignored by Washington, no matter which party is in power. But oil is only one piece of a much larger puzzle. The relationship between the United States and Venezuela was not always hostile. For much of the 20th century, Venezuela was actually one of Washington's closest partners in Latin America. U.S. oil companies operated freely, Venezuela exported massive amounts of crude to American refineries, and the country was seen as a relatively stable democracy compared to its neighbors. That relationship began to change dramatically at the end of the 1990s. When Hugo Chavez came to power in 1999, everything shifted. Chavez openly challenged U.S. influence, nationalized oil assets, strengthened ties with Cuba, Russia, China, and Iran, and positioned Venezuela as a symbol of resistance against American dominance. From Washington's perspective, this was not just a political disagreement. It was a direct challenge to U.S. influence in its own hemisphere. Since then, U.S. policy toward Venezuela has been shaped by three core goals. The first is to limit the influence of rival powers like Russia, China, and Iran in the region. The second is to ensure long-term energy security for the United States and its allies. The third is to push for political change inside Venezuela that aligns more closely with U.S. interests. Contrary to popular belief, the United States does not have a single fixed plan for Venezuela. Instead, it has a flexible strategy that adapts to changing global conditions. Sometimes that strategy is aggressive, and sometimes it is pragmatic. What remains consistent is that Washington wants leverage over Venezuela's future. Sanctions are the most visible tool the U.S. has used. These sanctions are often portrayed as punishment, but in reality, they are a pressure mechanism. The idea is to restrict the Venezuelan government's access to global financial systems, oil markets, and international investment, making it harder for the leadership to maintain power without negotiating. However, sanctions also come with unintended consequences, including severe economic hardship for ordinary Venezuelans. Despite tough rhetoric, the U.S. has repeatedly shown that it is willing to negotiate when it suits its interests. Behind closed doors, American officials have held talks with Venezuelan representatives even during periods of maximum pressure. This reveals an important truth. Washington's goal is not chaos or total collapse. Chaos creates opportunities for rivals, not stability. Energy is central to everything. Even as the U.S. talks about renewable energy and climate goals, oil still matters enormously. American refineries, especially along the Gulf Coast, are uniquely designed to process Venezuela's heavy crude. Replacing that supply is costly and inefficient. This is why, despite sanctions, exceptions and licenses have quietly allowed limited Venezuelan oil to flow when global markets tightened. The Ukraine war made this reality even clearer. When Russian energy supplies were disrupted, Washington suddenly found itself rethinking its hardline stance on Venezuela. This was not about ideology, it was about supply, prices, and strategic flexibility. When energy markets are under stress, principles become negotiable. Another critical factor is migration. Millions of Venezuelans have fled the country due to economic collapse. Many of them are now moving north, passing through Central America and Mexico toward the U.S. border. This has turned Venezuela from a distant foreign policy issue into a domestic political problem for Washington. Reducing migration pressure has become a powerful incentive for the U.S. to stabilize Venezuela rather than isolate it endlessly. This leads to a key point that is often misunderstood. The United States does not necessarily want to overthrow the Venezuelan government by force. Military intervention would be risky, expensive, and politically toxic. It could also trigger regional instability and international backlash. Instead, Washington prefers gradual change through economic pressure, negotiations, and internal political shifts. The U.S. has supported opposition movements in Venezuela, but even this support has evolved over time. Early efforts focused on rapid regime change, which failed. Later strategies shifted toward encouraging negotiated transitions, power, sharing arrangements, and election-based solutions, even if those elections are imperfect. This reflects realism, not weakness. China's role cannot be ignored. Beijing has invested tens of billions of dollars in Venezuela, primarily through oil-backed loans. For China, Venezuela is a long-term strategic asset and a source of energy diversification. The U.S. understands that completely isolating Venezuela only pushes it deeper into China's orbit. This is one of the reasons Washington has slowly softened certain policies. Russia's involvement is more symbolic but still significant. Moscow uses Venezuela to signal that it can challenge U.S. influence close to American borders. Military cooperation, arms sales, and political support serve this purpose. However, Russia's capacity to sustain deep involvement has been weakened by its own economic and military pressures elsewhere. Iran's presence adds another layer. Tehran has provided fuel, technical assistance, and ideological solidarity. For the U.S., this is particularly concerning because it links Venezuela to broader Middle Eastern tensions. Yet again, total isolation only strengthens this axis. So what does Washington actually want? At its core, the U.S. wants a Venezuela that is predictable, economically functional, and not openly hostile. It wants a government that cooperates on energy markets, limits foreign military presence, and reduces migration flows. Whether that government is socialist or capitalist matters less than whether it aligns with these strategic priorities. Democracy and human rights are part of the narrative, but they are not the sole drivers. They serve as both genuine concerns and political tools. When democracy aligns with strategic interests, it is emphasized. When it conflicts, it becomes flexible. This is not unique to Venezuela. It is how great powers operate. Another misconception is that the U.S. wants to exploit Venezuela's oil directly. In reality, American companies prefer stable contracts, legal certainty, and predictable regulation. They do not want to operate in chaos or under constant political risk. This again points to stabilization rather than destruction. The future of U.S.-Venezuela relations will likely involve incremental normalization. Sanctions will be adjusted, not removed overnight. Oil exports will increase gradually under strict conditions. Political reforms will be encouraged, but not forced through invasion. This slow approach allows Washington to maintain leverage while avoiding sudden shocks. Domestic politics in the U.S. also play a major role. Different administrations emphasize different tactics, but the underlying goals remain similar. Hardline rhetoric often plays well with certain voters, while quiet diplomacy happens behind the scenes. Public statements and private actions are not always the same. For Venezuela, this creates a complex environment. The government must balance resistance with pragmatism. Total defiance leads to isolation, while total submission risks internal backlash. Negotiation becomes the only sustainable path, even if it is slow and frustrating. The Venezuelan people are caught in the middle. They are the ones who suffer most from economic collapse, sanctions, corruption, and mismanagement. From Washington's perspective, improving humanitarian conditions is important, but it is often secondary to strategic calculations. Aid is usually tied to political concessions. Looking ahead, a complete return to the old U.S.-Venezuela alliance is unlikely. Too much has changed. Trust has been broken on both sides. However, a new transactional relationship is possible, one based on energy, migration control, and regional stability rather than ideological alignment. The idea that the U.S. plans to destroy Venezuela or turn it into a colony does not match reality. Destruction creates vacuum, and vacuums invite rivals. The U.S. wants influence, not ruins. It wants leverage, not endless conflict. At the same time, the idea that Washington has accepted the Venezuelan government fully is also false. Pressure will remain. Sanctions will remain a bargaining chip. Recognition and legitimacy will be conditional. This balancing act will define the next phase. Quiet deals, limited cooperation, public criticism, and private compromise will coexist. This is not dramatic, but it is effective. In the end, U.S. plans for Venezuela are not about revenge or ideology. They are about control, stability, and competition in a multipolar world. Venezuela is not just a country in crisis. It is a strategic piece on a global chessboard. Understanding this helps cut through the noise. It explains why policies seem contradictory, why sanctions tighten and loosen, and why dialogue never fully disappears. The U.S. is not improvising blindly. It is adapting to reality, even when that reality is uncomfortable. For Venezuela, the path forward depends not only on Washington, but on internal reforms, regional dynamics, and global shifts. The U.S. can influence outcomes, but it cannot fully dictate them. As the world moves into an era of energy uncertainty, geopolitical rivalry, and migration pressures, Venezuela's importance will only grow, and so will the attention it receives from the United States. This is not a story of a single plan or a secret blueprint. It is a story of power, interests, and long-term strategy, and it is far from over. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel.